Hey.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in. The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to welcome candidates for State Senate from the 17th District. I'm Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor, and I'll let the other board members introduce themselves.
I'm Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian and Columbian.com, and I'm a member of the editorial board.
And Ben Campbell, publisher and co-owner of the Columbian.
Right, and we do have a reporter sitting in, and I think the photographer will just take some quick photos and probably then be leaving. And as mentioned, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. And let's see, I think that's all the housekeeping. Now we'll get to the candidates. Please take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourselves, explain why you are running for this position, and then we'll get into specific policy questions. And we'll start with Marla.
Great. My name is Marla Keethler. I am running for the state senate here in the newly drawn 17th district. I'm currently the mayor of White Salmon, and I would say my experience at the local level is a big reason why I decided to run for this seat. You know, day in and day out, I've worked in a nonpartisan space. It's my only background in public service to really deliver projects and get things done for my community. And I think that experience has really motivated my desire to continue with public service. Previous to that, I had about a 15-year career in communications, primarily sports broadcasting, but I think that love of storytelling is something I've had as a child. And it's also, I think, a skill and a strength that I've brought into elected office. And what's been eye-opening to me is how much we often are lacking in having the right conversations and communicating effectively into our communities about the laws and policies that affect them and the realities of different projects and why some are important. And so that's been a lot of my work as mayor. And I think in that, trying to move things at a local level, there are definitely instances where I think there's room for improvement and different perspectives in making some of these policies that really relate to work we're trying to do at the local level on infrastructure and housing and education.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify, Mayor of White Salmon, is that technically nonpartisan?
It's a nonpartisan, and it's a strong mayor city, which there are only so few of those, especially in the Clark County area nowadays.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, Paul Harris, been a state representative for 14 years, but I've lived in Clark County or in Vancouver for 45 years. Served on the Evergreen School Board from 1991 to 2001. Been involved in local politics for about the last 14 years. Raised all my children here, had 5 children, all of them graduated from Evergreen School District, all of them from Mountain View High School. I have 9 grandchildren. I've been involved in the local area through Miller Paint Company. I was vice president of Miller Paint Company for about 12 years, and then had my own paint company for a number of years. Enjoy serving in the House. I've been in the House for 14 years. I feel like I have an important voice. I think what Marla said is really true. I think we need variety of opinions. The Democrats this is a partisan race. The Democrats are 1 vote away from having a supermajority. So I think it's very important that we have different voices in the room and that different voices get heard.
Great, thank you. And thanks again to both of you for joining us. Start out, one of the obviously big issues facing the state is homelessness. The legislature took some steps to address that this year. Have they done enough? What should be the next steps? What do you foresee in that regard? We'll start with Paul.
So we've done the state has done quite a bit in the homeless issue. I met with 5 individuals who you have reported on actually last night. I met with 5 of them that are along the Mill Plain Wall that feel like the city of Vancouver has not heard them. I have a real concern on what's going on, more so in Vancouver than I do in White Salmon and Camas and Washougal as I travel the district. But Vancouver specifically has quite a bit of a homeless issue that's, especially out in my area. I live in Cascade Park. The Fred Meyer out there. I tragically know the WASDOT person by Bill Morrison by first name. I call him quite often and have him move encampments. We truly need to have a camping ban. The law has changed. I think we need to keep these people moving. Whenever we let them plant for a long period of time, we have issues. I had them camped by my office. I had 30 of them. for almost a year. How I got them moved was to basically tell the city, I'm going to take soil samples. And at that point, the city of Vancouver reacted and they moved them and they dispersed throughout the community. We need to provide them with services. I serve on the board of Columbia River Mental Health. We need to provide them services, both mental health services and rehabilitation services. But what we can't do is let them stay in a place like they did for mine and by my office. And I would walk that encampment every week. There was not one humane thing going on in that encampment. There was human fecal matter everywhere. There was garbage everywhere. A garbage receptacle was provided for them. They would not use it. We had a porta potty brought in. They would use that from time to time, but still would not use that. I found that fascinating that the services were offered and they still would not use them. They cut into our power. They cut into our sprinkler system at the office where I'm at. We need to help these people, and helping them isn't allowing them to continue to camp. If I'm reelected, I will work on the ITA, the Involuntary Treatment Act. It's one of the acts that we need to look at that would give both the city and the police a greater opportunity to help these people, because I really believe these people are not completely operating like you and I would operate. They're on drugs. They need help.
Now, when you say we need a camping ban, is that something that can be done at the state level, or is that up to individual jurisdictions?
It's up to individual jurisdictions, but I don't believe our city, the Boise decision has been overturned. We can enforce a camping ban. And I believe we need to be harder and really provide them the services. We are just right now and I agree, if you really look at it, we're probably moving the same people around. But we can't make this too simple on them. I'm really sorry, but if we make it really easy on them and don't hold them accountable, then we're going to continue to have a very serious problem. And I think you can see that in some of our stores, in the theft that we have. We're in the top 3 in the United States for retail theft. Tragically, I know the president of Fred Meyer on a first name basis now because of what's gone on. The McGilvery, Fred Meyer, we have security there. They have security at many of the stores. We're all paying for that and higher grocery prices. I just think we've got to help these people, and allowing them to continue to live the way they live is not the answer. Camping is not the answer.
Marla?
Sure. But I think when you're talking about houselessness or those that are currently without somewhere to live, you're still always talking about housing issue. You know, by the time that you were seeing the instances of people who do not have shelter, it is because there's been a policy breakdown much farther upstream. So the first thing I would say is that approaching discussions around helping those who are unhoused, we need to also make sure that we aren't continuing to villainize these individuals, because there is a broad array of issues or impacts in their lives that have caused them to find, you know, a moment in their life where they are without housing. So one, I think the first thing is you have to address the resources and how are we funding and accounting for the support that is needed for the agencies and organizations on the ground doing some of this work to engage those individuals that are in an encampment or have not been able to find support or access through an identified shelter program. But I think this also requires some work and better coordination between state and federal funding as well. You know, there's the continuum of care structure. Obviously, the city of Vancouver is very involved on that with Clark County, but I think digging into also how those structures have been put in place. And as you see the burden shared sometimes more on the city side versus the county side, or where there is a desire to do some of the work that is needed, should that be reconsidered? The other thing that I would say is that when you are only focusing on the thing that is giving others the most discomfort, the encampment itself, you are indeed pushing that problem elsewhere. And until we continue to dive in and allocate the appropriate resources and funding and education, again, I think it is a disservice to try to, and it's also dehumanizing people to collectively say that if they are homeless, then they are X. There are many instances of people who are finding themselves one rent check away from being evicted, especially across this district. And in the rural areas especially, we do have homeless that are in our communities, maybe not as prominent as what you're seeing in this part of the district, but that goes more to the point of going farther upstream. And so to really address housing, to address homelessness, you've got to then talk about the housing issue.
And Paul, you didn't mention housing much in that. And has the state done enough to increase housing?
I think we could do more. I think you did a really interesting article just in the last couple of days regarding where kind of what Marla was talking about, where we've placed people in housing, but yet they're still doing drugs. And the gal actually was talking about that, how she felt safer on the street. She was trying to decide in herself if she felt safer in her place or if she felt safer in the street. And I thought that was just eye-opening to me, that here we've got allocations for housing for someone, they're in their housing, but all around her, they're still doing drugs. And she felt so I think it's a multitude of problems. I definitely think we need to come up with more housing dollars, but I think we need to once again, there needs to be some accountability with those dollars. How long are we going to allow people to continue to use and be in our housing? I think we need to make sure that they're taking services, and we need to make sure that we're helping them along this pathway, and not just give them the housing and say, okay, you're okay now, you have a house or a place to reside. Your article was very telling to me that we have a lot of people that we have placed in housing that are still using a lot of drugs or still need mental health treatment. And so there's gaps still that are there. My heart went out to that gal. My heart went out to the five or seven families that have homes along Mill Plain here. Most of them have children, and their kids don't feel safe. They can't play in their backyard. There's needles. And I thought it was interesting that the safety of those individuals were not equally as concerned, I guess, as the people that were living there. I feel like this is really a difficult issue. But we need to take care of literally everybody. The citizen that owns the property that doesn't feel safe with their kids playing in their backyard because there's a homeless encampment right over the side of them and they're throwing their paraphernalia into their yard. To me, yeah, we've got to do better than that. Just build out more housing.
Does that involve housing shelters or temporary housing,
So
or building more?
I ran the bill for the city of Vancouver to put the big tent in over at Clark College. I was not successful in that legislation because the college fought that. We need that facility somewhere. I think it's going to be at the gym now at Nadenhoff, I think, but that's a year out. That's a year out where we're going to have these 150 beds. I'm very concerned. What's going to happen in this next year for Vancouver or for Clark County? I have real concerns. I just toured the county jail. That was eye-opening to me. I had never been in the jail. The idea that my party, because my party controls the county, so most of their Republicans or conservatives the idea that they didn't vote for the 1% is absolutely appalling to me. That facility is unbelievable. It's overcrowded. So there's really no place, at least in the county, to put these individuals. I mean, certainly not in jail. So Columbia River Mental Health will help them. Share will help them. There's individuals that will help them, but our county jail system is not in good shape. And just, yeah.
Marla, anything to add regarding housing and homelessness?
Yeah, I think to the question about tell me if I'm remembering it incorrectly, but I think your question was, has the state done enough on housing? And to that answer, I would say, I think there has been good work to revisit how we need to address the lack of supply of housing and diverse housing stock. But I would push back and say, I think in recent sessions, there have been some proposals that have brought forward that I don't think will realize the results we need to see on the ground. So I think when it comes to an issue of housing, you still have to figure out what that relationship is between state policy while also allowing local decisions to be made that are community supported. Because if it is a edict or a declaration of this is what needs to be built across the state in communities large and small, you can very quickly not see those results on the ground if there is not that buy-in at the local level. And I've certainly seen that as we have worked to improve and change our code to allow for more diverse housing. I think the role that the state can be playing more effectively is how do you fund and support what is needed to spur that eventual development, because there's also a huge gap in infrastructure. And again, all these things intersect. But, you know, until you have the infrastructure addressed, the connections of water, even in all of your identified urban growth areas, in addition to city areas that are not yet developed fully, and expansion of sewer and proper, you know, expansion of your public road systems, then there's still a significant burden on developers, especially in part of this district that are farther away from your urban centers. And so scaling these models of affordable housing that you've seen in other parts of the state, very problematic and difficult. I think programs like CHIP have been beneficial. I think looking to continue that program, but also expand it so that you're creating qualifiers that smaller communities can meet, where there is a benefit cost return on funding some of those projects. Right now, it's really hard in that kind of a state program to reach the scale that is being looked for to be able to point to a project as a success. And so it's leaving communities behind.
Would you have supported rent stabilization bills that came up?
So rent stabilization certainly is one that has been discussed. I will say locally in our city, we did implement, our city council did implement longer notification windows required by landlords if they were going to increase rent over 10%. And I would say there is a problem there we need to address when we are seeing rent increases that are much higher than what should be expected as a standard cost of living. And what is that direction that this state should look for? But there are many stories and many instances of people saying 50% or more increases, and that's not sustainable. And
but would you have supported the bill in the legislature?
I think the bill that had been brought forward needs further work, but I would certainly consider further work and support further work on seeing what we could do to support renters. And I think in some way you have to then address unsustainable increases in rent.
Paul, did you support that bill?
Absolutely not.
Great, thank you, Craig.
Let's shift gears, talk about transportation for a minute, and what the 17th district's needs are and what the state should do to fund them. So for one thing, you have not one, but two bridges across the Columbia River that are being talked about for replacement. Marla, would you like to start about that?
Well, I would, and Craig, you know, you're right. There's two being talked about for replacement, but there are three in this district, you know, in the Columbia River, and two in this district and one just outside.
One was privately owned though.
Yes, well, you know, one of those we were successful in legislation a few sessions back. So certainly appreciate Representative Harris has supported that when it comes to the Hood River White Salmon Bridge, which will continue to be locally owned, but under a bi-state authority. But I would say, you know, especially the issue of infrastructure and transportation has been top of mind for me as mayor. It would continue to be top of mind as senator, because I think in a lot of ways, Southwest Washington is a hub of a lot of the necessary and critical and essential work that needs to be done, much of that being the I-5 bridge. I think navigating the journey of getting a project to move forward, like the Hood River White Salmon Bridge that has seen stops and starts over 30 years, has made it very clear to me how critical it is for elected officials to show true leadership. And sometimes that means being more transparent into the communities about the real picture of a project and what needs to be considered. But I would say, especially with the I-5 bridge, I am concerned that especially in other campaigns, but in this part of the state right now, that there are conversations being brought forward that indicate, you know, some candidates having a tendency towards a bias of obstruction and not really wanting to serve this region and come into a project like the I-5 bridge, which has seen recent momentum, and do the necessary work to make sure that we do indeed deliver that project for our community. I think that, there has been a lot of federal and state support. We've already seen that project fall apart once before, and you only get so many times of built up trust and partnership. And I think that if we were to see a dramatic shift in the direction that that bridge is going, those partnerships could be lost, and I'm not sure they come back. And I've seen that with the Hood River White Salmon Bridge. Feel very, grateful that we have the on the ground bi-state bipartisan support, not only locally, but at the state and federal level. But it's required real conversations. There's a local funding commitment that's needed there, as well as state and federal dollars. So very similar to what the I-5 bridge is navigating.
Does the state need to pass a transportation funding package? So should taxes be increased for transportation needs?
Well, I think 2025, certainly transportation is top of mind. And, I think there's another element here. And certainly right now, we just talked about 2 projects in need of replacement, but I think there is an overall catch up that still needs to be done just on the preservation and maintenance of a lot of the infrastructure in this state. And there are still projects that have been funded in the last 2 transportation bills that, potentially the funding that's been allocated to finally realize those is at risk. But with the rising costs, I would say our real focus to start in 25 needs to make sure that we are staying true and delivering the things we've already committed to. And what would that look like? Obviously, there are things we have to navigate in terms of seeing the decrease in revenues from gas tax and determining, what are other ways that we can be funding transportation. I think you see some of that effort in the Climate Commitment Act. So it'll be interesting to see what the voters do in November. But again, based on what those decisions are, that could be an even bigger lift for the next session.
We have one more bridge, actually, the Slough Bridge in Camas. It is really
It's
important.
not a Columbia River crossing.
Well,
It's
actually, there actually is water.
Don't drive in wide mobile homes.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
actually, I've been a strong proponent of that, and we actually took the money from that, which was $50 million, and we took it and we expanded Highway 14, and I want that money back for that little bridge. That's gonna be probably 75 million now, to be quite frank with you.
Yeah.
I sit on the I-5 Bridge Commission, and I am a absolute strong supporter of the I-5 Bridge. I will not deviate on that, and I need a bridge. Very similar, I would say very similar to what our Congresswoman said about the I-5 Bridge, and I would agree with her. I need a practical bridge. I need a bridge that will carry more traffic. I need a bridge that is safe, and I need a bridge that hopefully has very limited, if no tolls. And was our Congresswoman, and I appreciated that because we disproportionately will be paying for that bridge, and we need to take care of our citizens that are commuting there. In the 17th district, we have about 60,000 people that commute on that bridge every day. They are disproportionately going to pay for that, and I think we need to make sure that we take care of them on that. But I absolutely need a bridge. Will there be mass transit on it? There will. Am I a light rail guy? I actually would prefer rapid bus transit, which we have, C-Tran has done a very good job on, and I will continue to advocate for that. Could I lose that? I might. I don't know. I know one thing. I need a bridge, and I need a new bridge. I toured schools yesterday in White Salmon that are 75 years old. They need to be replaced. I have a bridge that's over 100 years old. It needs to be replaced. Do I need a third crossing somewhere? I hope so. I hope at some point, and I think Marla said it well, I think bridges across states are difficult. They just are. And actually, even within my own party, bridges are difficult. But we need a third crossing at some point. We need to address what is happening in our community. And so, but if we can't build an I-5, I will continue to say this. If we can't come to consensus on an I-5 bridge, what makes me think I'm going to come consensus on a third or some other bridge? We need to address this bridge first. We need to address White Salmon Bridge. We've got some needs. Do we have enough dollars? Probably not. Although we've kicked in a lot of dollars for the I-5 bridge. How short is the White Salmon? Is it 100 million?
Well, we only need 50 million
50
from
million.
Washington State.
Okay, so 100 million total between the two. So, and what's interesting is, our state is actually in better financial situation in the transportation dollars than Oregon. I mean, we wrote a check for the I-5 bridge. Oregon bonded for 30 years to come up with the money. So we might not be rich here, but we're certainly doing better than our counterpart. But we are behind on maintenance on many issues, and it'll be interesting to see how we fix that.
As Craig asked, would you favor a gas tax increase, or how do we pay for the other stuff beyond a
That's a
bridge?
great question. Like the third highest gas tax, I don't know. We're gonna have to do something. I'd love to sit in the room and try to figure it out. Do we increase taxes on electric cars? I don't know. I don't know. Are electric cars paying their fair share? They weigh a lot. I don't know. It's a great question. This is what we do in the legislature, sit down and discuss these issues, and I think it's one we need to talk about.
Craig, any follow up?
No.
Ben?
Sure. What can be done at the state level to improve the lack of affordable childcare in Clark County? Start.
Childcare, I live daily. I have a 4 and 5-year-old, and just last night was sharing kind of what the household budget looks like in my home, which is a lot of money, more than the mortgage goes to childcare. So this district, you have 2 counties that are recognized as childcare deserts, Skamania and Klickitat. Obviously, Clark County, there's also still a need. I think at the state level, there's a few things that can be done, and that's about supporting both sides, both the families who need this and have an obvious ceiling where at the end of the day, the numbers aren't going to work for both parents to work if it's more money to send the kids to care. So how do you figure out some policies and support systems where no family is spending more than 7% on childcare? I think is a goal that we should be striving for. That actually also equalizes for all working families instead of only addressing income thresholds by families. The second thing is this is also an industry that's primarily led by female business owners. And so how are we supporting these childcare providers that are going in, especially to some of the rural parts of the district? What are the support systems that they have? Because there is certainly a load and a lift to try to figure out that business plan of running a childcare facility from the ground up. There are some programs, I think the expansion of those, and also making sure that we are reaching other members of our community to encourage childcare that also is culturally sensitive for all members and families is an important part, and also good training. These are the people we are entrusting our children with. I think there's policy that's been put in place that was well intended to align with that, but at the end of the day has made it really hard for some business providers of childcare to be able to pay livable wages for the experience and skill that we are requiring. So revisiting some of those policies, I think, is also important. But in general, I would say that when I decided to run, this was an issue I wanted to speak about. I think it touches also on housing and just the general cost of affordability. But this is an economic development issue too. A lot of people who are in that stage of life where they are having young kids means they are also in that period of their professional pursuits where they are transitioning in between jobs or climbing that ladder for the next gain in their career. And so it's back to our employers too that are looking to bring their businesses into our communities. They're evaluating, is this a community that's providing all the things that my workers need? And so childcare is a big gap. And I think there's opportunity to bring employers to the table and look at what public-private partnerships have done. In Klickitat County, there's been a lot of work, not just in White Salmon, but also in Goldendale, to think creatively about public spaces. How do you give new life to buildings that already exist to meet an unmet need? And I think childcare can be doing that. And some of the programs that are available, creating some tweaks and modifications to the types of projects that can be funded would allow that kind of work to be more accessible.
Thank you. Paul? So Association of Washington Businesses, AWB, is the #1 priority is to look at childcare. I will be open to looking at 7%. We did a tour up in Canada. I was not able to go, but I've been part of that group and part of their dialogue. Canada has a very unique system that they're implemented, and it's interesting to see how it's working and not working. I think it's a really difficult thing without getting business involved, and I don't want government to run it all either. I think it needs to be a partnership with business and with government. I think AWB is doing a lot of work. I find it fascinating that the Democrats have had one vote away from a supermajority and have not addressed this in the last 10 to 12 years. There's been a lot of chatter about it, but they certainly could have fixed this if it was on their priority list. So apparently it hasn't been on their priority list. And so I am very open to looking at how we address childcare. I certainly wouldn't put it tied to the most volatile tax in our state, which and I believe that's what they've done with the capital gains tax. It did quite well the first year. It dived in half the second year, and it probably will dive again. If we're really going to fund childcare in our state and do it with business, let us not put it with the most volatile tax known to mankind throughout the United States, and then be shocked when we don't have the money for childcare. If it's a priority, then make it a priority, but don't tie it to something that you know is going to go down and down and down. That tells me it's really not a priority for you, nor is school funding for our small schools, because it also was tied to that. And if just in my tour yesterday of White Salmon and all my small school districts, but Camas, specifically Washougal, Stevenson, they all have school funding issues with their small schools, and they're all tied to this very volatile tax, which we're not going to bring in near what we thought, so we're not going to be able to fund it properly. Childcare is the same way. It fell into the same loop. We just need to do better if it's really a priority.
How would you fund those items then?
Are you kidding? We wrote a check. We need to. I think what boils down to our state government is priorities. What do we prioritize? When I started in the legislature, our budget was, this is 14 years ago, our budget was $36 billion. Last year, it was almost $80 billion.
And that's for 2 years.
That is for 2 years. It is doubled. It really boils down to priorities. It really does. And we need to find if childcare is a priority, then we need to make it a priority. And if we're going to get money in from a capital gains tax, then put it in the general fund. But don't fund something that's super important to you and isolate it. The first $500 million are going to go to small school construction and childcare. And then when you only get $230 million, you're shocked. And then all these programs start suffering. It shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't. Prioritization. Looking at the budget, figuring out what we're going to fund and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, anything else?
Thank you.
Regarding that, the capital gains tax, and the Climate Commitment Act, how are you going to vote on those two ballot measures to repeal those?
I'm going to vote yes to repeal both of them. But I'll honor the will of the voters. I mean, that to me is this is what I love about democracy. So whatever happens on those, my job is to represent the 50+ vote. So I will absolutely honor that. I believe the Climate Commitment Act, I believe Oregon, Washington, California are interesting states. I have half of my grandchildren are in Utah. Utah's still getting 30% of its power from coal. I just find it fascinating that what we do in our state for so little is we are 0.5% of the problem. Our people are paying dearly for this. Do I believe in climate change? I absolutely do. Do I believe that when we do our CO2 readings here shortly, do I believe that what we have done has impacted the world? It may have slightly, but I believe CO2 emissions in the world will still have gone up. And yet we are paying dearly for that. But I will honor, hey, to me, it's just a tax. If I've been shocked by anything in this election cycle, it is who thinks they're going to get CCA money, Climate Commitment Act money. It is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I sat down with retired state employees and they think that their COLA is going to be paid with some CCA money. I says, not if I'm your senator or your state representative. You have to show me a direct nexus of how, because I want this money to go to preserve and protect the climate. I don't want it to go to a COLA. I don't want it to go to some nebulous thing over here to help the budget. I want it to clean our climate. And I really believe that. If we're gonna tax ourselves for Climate Commitment Act, it should go to the climate. And it better be a direct nexus to that, not arbitrarily funding of different, because what I've seen is almost every union has their hand out and thinks that they're going to get some climate commitment money. And boy, not if there's not a nexus to it, they're not. We're paying dearly for that. And I think as we clean up the climate, that's great. But what are our partners this is a world problem. This certainly isn't a Washington, Oregon, and California problem. This should be handled by the federal government with our national partners, because this is a world problem. This isn't a West Coast problem.
Marla, how are you going to vote on the capital gains and the Climate Commitment Act?
I will vote no. I do not want to repeal either of those initiatives. I think, a lot of the messaging that is out there about these, what people should really be asking is who benefits when these are repealed. Yes, there are programs that have been identified through capital gains that are going to protect many of our youngest and most vulnerable residents. I think that the legislature did it in an intentional way to address some of these areas that were lacking in funding and support. And, I think that on the Climate Commitment Act, certainly climate change is a global problem. I don't think that means that we push it off of our plate to not also lead as a state. And I think that there are programs and projects that are being funded in a way through the Climate Commitment Act that allow statewide us to lean into and be better prepared to create a sustainable future for not only the state, but contribute nationally. I think earlier, just to touch on the point about, why hasn't childcare been a priority? I think the thing I've appreciated in this race is that we both have a strong belief in the role of public service and believe in government. And I would say from my perspective, a lot of the passion I bring into running for this office is absolutely, we need different experiences at the table. And the experience of a working parent when you are juggling toddlers and a partner whose job requires travel half of the year, you live it in a way that is different than looking at it at a different life stage. And I think back to these initiatives, there is work that has been done. It's not all the work. I also don't think that government is the one that solves all these problems. But when government is not stepping up to lead and bringing forward and creating those coalitions between private business and organizations to also step up in the way that they can, that's not leadership. So I will be voting no.
Oh, let's see here. What have we touched on? So how about law enforcement and rules that police want to tighten up? So do we have enough rules to allow are the laws tough enough to allow the police to work effectively in Washington? And do we have enough funding for law enforcement officers? So Marla, you want to talk about that?
Sure. Public safety, I feel like there's a lot of things to talk through on that one. And as a mayor running a police department, I certainly have had an on the ground experience. And I would say the first thing, number one, if you support public safety, you have to fund public safety. And one of the most problematic things in this state now for over a decade has been the 1% limit on what a city can raise for funding their police departments. We have the lowest amount of officers protecting our residents nationally when you look at a per capita breakdown. But the majority of a general fund budget at the local level is going to public safety. So addressing how and where we want public safety funded is number one. So right now with the 1% cap, we are taking that control and that freedom of local communities to make that decision away, which means more of a burden being placed at the state level, which is then exponentially greater. I applaud and hope that we continue, and I would push to continue the full funding that we do right now through the Law Enforcement Academy so that we are training and not carrying that burden back to the local municipalities. But, there's other elements here of public safety. And I think that, retail theft, it was raised earlier. I would support looking at the ways that we can continue to create the tools that are necessary to address things like that, where we have seen an uptick. But the full system of criminal justice has other layers. And, there is a lack of public defense right now. So supporting the proper training and workforce, I don't know if recruitment is the right word, but you can't put everything on one side of it and not see the full continuum of effects. So when we give those tools to our officers to properly charge for crimes that we say that we want them to charge for, it's a breakdown when you can't see that justice followed through to the end. And there is a breakdown there at the local level as well. So, I think that when it comes to public safety, there is a deeper conversation we need to be having, and that's how it's funded. And there's a big breakdown there that I think the state has done a disservice in properly communicating to the public what they have really been supporting by not revisiting the 1% ceiling.
This is, first off, Democrats have controlled the state for 40 years. This is the only state in the United States of America where the governor has never changed office in 40 years, and the Democrats have controlled this place for 20 years, both chambers. So I want to be perfectly clear here. There's a problem with public safety. If there's a problem with the 1%, if there's any of these problems, you can only look at one party. And I rarely am very partisan. I work across the aisle extremely well, but there's only one party to blame for this. I tell you, they tried deregulating drugs in this state, and they've tried to walk it back now. It was a complete catastrophe. Complete. They took away the police pursuit bill, and the only reason the Democrats came back to the table is because it was an initiative on them, and they walked it back halfway. We're still not there. We still have serious drug problems in our state. The idea that it's a misdemeanor, we have open drug use in our city and in our state. We're the number 3 in auto theft in the United States of America. We're number 1 in store theft. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? My city and county oftentimes didn't take their 1%. They should have. I will not give a 3% authority to cities and counties. You want to talk unaffordability? We talked about housing affordability. Think if you allow a city or county to raise your property taxes 3% in a year. Do you think that's going to make things more affordable? Do you think that's going to make that first home buyer have the ability maybe to get into the home when their property taxes will go up randomly up 3% in a year? I absolutely think it's completely the opposite of affordability. What we need to do is hold our elected officials accountable. They need to vote for a 1%. I find it strange that my county commissioners voted for the 1% when they're leaving office. It tells me that they had no courage and they could not show leadership. Leadership is doing the right thing during a difficult time. When I visited the county jail, I was just shocked at what's going on in our county jail. How people were living, the lack of any rehabilitation taking place, there's none. It's tragedy. We have jails up in, I think, either Klickitat, I think their jail's closed. So, they need to vote for the 1%. Do what our city is doing, coming out for a bond, or they're coming out for a levy to fund more police. What's interesting on that, after visiting the jail, it's kind of so, do I want 80 more police in Vancouver who can't send them anywhere because there's no room in the inn? It's a really interesting paradigm that the Democrats have created. I have a jail problem. I have a policing problem. I have where we've tried an experiment in our society of basically drugs are okay, a little bit of theft is okay. Well, that didn't work. And they really haven't walked it all the way back yet. When I get a call from a constituent who's in a Home Depot parking lot, sees his stolen truck, calls the police and says, well, I don't know if I'd approach it. And he says, hey, he's getting in the truck and driving away. And they said, well, nothing we can do. We can't chase him. That's my truck. Representative Harris had 2 vehicles stolen. We've got to get back to law and order. We absolutely have to. We are not, it's just, so what, and I'm sorry. I just, this is honestly, so checks and balances in government. I think Marla's a great person probably, but to be quite frank, what I don't need is another Democrat up there. I do not need them to have a super majority where there's nobody else at the table and they get to run these experiments on our society. It just hasn't worked, folks. And we need to make sure we have balanced government. My party doesn't have all the right ideas, and I can tell you the other side doesn't have all the right ideas. We need to be in the room and we need to work out our differences and come to good, solid legislation. But if we have a super majority, they won't be listening to anybody but themselves.
Marla, would you support a bill allowing for a 3% increase for cities and counties?
Well, first I will say I'm running as myself, Marla, and I am part of the Democratic Party. It aligned with my values that I hold dear. But I also believe strongly that what we need more of in government is the different perspectives, even within a party. Because the thing that even just was brought up is how we continue to deceive people. And I would say that's the danger of when you don't have government that's having the right conversations. I do support revisiting the 1% ceiling on levies right now for local government. The reason why I do is because what that looks like on the ground is it doesn't even cover the COLAs for any of us to properly meet and fund the police officers that we want to retain, the staff that we need with professional expertise to handle issues like housing from a planning perspective. 1% is a fool's errand that is known in this state. The Supreme Court said as much in the early 2000s. So it's been a disservice and a lack of education to the public to not have the real conversation. No, it is not a 3% blanket increase of your tax. That's the first horrible misnomer and miseducation that continues to be out there. It's proportional. So the 1% increase in my city looks like $4,000 a year. $4,000 a year is the total 1% that comes into my town that the people my town has elected to make those decisions in my city council can leverage. What does $4,000 fund? Not a lot. It is why you see the overextension of so many state programs and so many communities having to continue to go to the state to try to have more help to solve problems. Communities don't want to always be asking for that kind of help. Communities, strong communities, make a great state. And the problem is we have tied communities' hands. And so I hate when this conversation comes up and it gets reduced down to a fear tactic of your property tax is going to go up 3%. That is absolutely not true. We almost need the Schoolhouse Rock version of how property taxes figured out in this state to reassure people that as they see those market values fluctuate, it is not a given that their rate against their cemetery district and port and city and fire district also are going to go up a certain percentage. So what has bothered me as this continues to come forward, and I agree on both sides of the aisle, this has been a miss in terms of understanding what it looks like at the local level. And clearly I am passionate about this because dealing with the budgets and having police officers that have left for jobs to different states or neighboring counties that can pay more, we have experienced, not just on the side of law enforcement, but in the professional space that small communities especially need right now when you're thinking about city planners and city administrators. So this issue is an important one. I look forward to bringing it forward in a way where hopefully we can get more people to the table to have a conversation. But don't forget that where this came from, when you ask who does this benefit, Iman set this in motion decades ago. And initially it was a 2%. And then as a final act, lowered it to 1%. But we have done a disservice to the public now from having such a span of time where we have been held to such a false expectation. 1% doesn't fund our households in terms of a salary increase year over year. How do we expect it to fund communities that are strong and supported to do the things their residents want to see so that they actually feel like government's working for them? That's a core breakdown. People are frustrated because they're looking around their town and they see streets that are in disrepair, come to Paul's been in White Salmon a lot lately. I'm sure he has driven on a lot of potholes. And again, you talk about the breakdown over the last 30 years of the lack of funding. So now everyone is looking at the state to solve problems. I would say you start having a real conversation and revisit what the appropriate limit is here and give some of that power back to your local communities. And you start to solve the ripple effect of other issues that have been cascading now for decades.
Now, and Paul, obviously, a 1% increase doesn't keep up with inflation.
I would agree, but I find it fascinating. I would turn to my own county and city. Have they taken their 1% when they could? My county rarely did. I find that fascinating. And now they want 3%. I'm sorry. Take your 1%, do what you're supposed to do, manage it. I mean, Marla, okay. So you make it sound like you're super poor over there, but you took a significant pay increase and you asked for it and you got it. 300% pay increase. So I think it's really fascinating. To me, this is government service. One of the bills I will sponsor will that when you're sitting in office, you cannot raise your pay. You have to go through a cycle where you have to be reelected, and then you can take that pay raise. I have never, ever asked for a pay raise in a state office and then taken it immediately and taken a 300% pay increase. So there's money there somewhere for some people to get pay raises and others not.
Marla, is that accurate?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. I would love to talk about this. And so at the city government, I am on the executive side. In a strong mayor form of government, I oversee the administration. I do not pass laws. I do not put in place any of the policies or adopt the final budget. The city council does that. Did I, about 4 years ago, ask council to revisit the pay that we stipend our elected officials, both city council and mayor? Absolutely. Because again, let's go farther upstream here. There have been a lot of conversations, especially in the current years, post 2020, about recognizing that a lot of our institutions seem to be ingrained with a sense of privilege, and only certain people are accessing them and making decisions. Well, why is that? Let's look at a local level of government. So when a mayor is paid $650 a month, who can do that? People who are at a life stage of retirement or independent wealth so that they are looking for volunteer opportunities to give back, which is certainly laudable. But someone who is working class at the prime of their years where they need to provide for a family, is that achievable, especially in a role of government where if you really want to enact change and move on issues, grant applications that I am singularly writing, work on a bridge project that's a minimum of 15 hours a week in addition to my role as a mayor, it is not realistic. And so what continues to happen is you leave a certain sector of our population out of the room where decisions are made. And if we're really going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, then no, I don't appreciate the way that it's being framed as if it is a level of greed. It is the fact that I took a detour from my professional pursuits because I no longer can work somewhere for 40 hours a week because I give 40 hours a week to this pursuit of working for my community and helping as a commissioner on the Hood River White Salmon Bridge project. So when I asked council to revisit our stipends, it was also the result of intentional engagement we were doing as a city to get into our especially Spanish-speaking community and understand what were some of the barriers. And yes, we have addressed language gaps in terms of our public hearings and access to materials, but a huge one that we heard that's the reality for a lot of working families is that I don't have time. It is a lot more than just 2 council meetings a week to run a city in that structure of government. So I am not going to be shamed into thinking that paying for the work that is required to do something well is what we all expect when we go into our professional pursuits. I don't think anyone shows up to this desk in their positions if it's not still putting food on the table. That's the reality for a lot of working people. And so when we're thinking about how do you change the face of our government, you need to have these jobs either be truly something that can be managed in a time frame that doesn't take you out of the full-time workforce, or if it is going to require that time, then I think compensation has to be adjusted. We've seen just south of us in Oregon, we've lost legislators in that state. Our neighbors over in Hood River, their state representative stepped down because the $33,000 annual stipend wasn't enough. for where she was to provide for her family. So this is not an issue unique to White Salmon, but I do think it is an issue, especially at the local and sometimes state levels, that should be discussed in the way of what you're really trying to address, which is people that are left out, and it is a barrier.
Does White Salmon have a balanced budget?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm sorry, Paul, any additional thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, it concerns me because there's chatter in the legislature that we need to go full time. And let me tell you, this is service. There's nothing wrong with that. This is service. We have young people that serve in the legislature. I think a misnomer would be that we become full-time legislators and we never come back into our district and are in our district and associate and live in our districts and see what's going on in our districts. I really believed I served on the school board, didn't get compensated. I spent a ton of time. It was a service I gave back to my community. That's not bad. And I think when you run for a job or for an office and it pays a certain amount and you know that, then I think you serve during that time period for that amount. And if you want to get a raise, then you ask for it and you get it later when you're reelected. But I just think some of these things are service, and that's not bad.
But does that create a barrier for some people who are unable to do that either time-wise or financially?
I don't know that it does, because I think you'd have to work that out in your own life. I mean, seriously. I mean,
Well,
I really do.
What
Yeah.
does the job of state senator pay or state representative?
56.
Okay, what's the mayor of White Salmon paid?
24,000.
$24,000. Okay, so, and White Salmon would have no city manager, so the mayor would do those types of functions.
We have a city administrator.
Yeah, they have a city
So I have a
administrator.
full-time salaried staff. But again, I'm putting in the time, and this was not a decision I made. I asked council to look at it. They did an analysis of other cities similar sized and what the compensation is for those positions. And back to this point of privilege, I am acutely aware. The only reason I have been able to pursue public service right now is because I am married. I have a partner who, through his union job, provides the healthcare for our family and has a wage that can pay most of the bills. But no, it is still privilege, because if I, God forbid, didn't have that partnership, I don't provide for my 2 children on $24,000 a year. So a voice is lost, a critical voice, because in my time as mayor, we have elevated the issue of childcare. It now sits on the county's top 10 list of infrastructure priorities, the acknowledgement we need to do more to figure out where government can support that industry, that need in the private sector for childcare. So I see the results of my perspective, and my perspective is also many of the people that I represent. And that, to me, is what we are trying to achieve in good government. I also am not disputing what Paul says about the role of the state legislature. I was weighed many things when I decided to run for this office. A reality of someone in my life stage that is still dependent on needing to pay a mortgage and pay all my bills and plan for my kids' college is evaluating, what would this compensation be? I am comfortable with the compensation to be a state legislator. Again, it is a decision for every person that they have to make, but you leave a lot of people out of the room when the stipend I inherited was $650 around there a month. It's not a mystery to me why the history of a lot of the elected leadership were people who did not look like me. They were at different life stages where they could afford and had that privilege to do that service. But if we want to see that service at all life stages, then there is a component there that is a barrier that keeps a lot of people out in different life stages.
Craig, anything else?
Just one last question, I guess, is would you continue to be the mayor of White Salmon if you're elected to the legislature?
No, I would not, because I'm also running, and I think the way that I have led as mayor of White Salmon is I'm going to do that job and do it well. And if I am elected as state senator, I want to be that representative for this entire district. And I don't think it's fair to the district or to the city of White Salmon.
Ben, did you have anything else? We'll move along then. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements. And we'll start with Paul.
So I feel like I've represented the 17th district extremely well. I've represented it for 14 years. I have reached across the aisle on numerous occasions. I think I'm known to work well within the district. I listen to the people well. I do emails every day. Get lots of emails, respond to them personally. I've been a strong proponent of public health and will continue to be. Notable endorsements, firefighters endorsed me. All the mayors endorsed me, other than the mayor that's running against me. There are large mayors in our cities. I think I've been endorsed by the people of the 17th district for 14 years. They have voted me in. This is a different district now. Definitely more diverse now. And I think that's a good thing, but I think the needs of, it's interesting as we've discussed today, the needs of Clark County are definitely different than the needs of White Salmon and Goldendale and some communities we haven't even talked about. They are definitely diverse and different needs. So I've traveled the district. I have the time. I have the time to do this. And I will give the time that is needed, and I will always listen to the will of the voters. Even if I might disagree with what their vote is, and the initiatives might be one of them. My job is to represent the people, not myself. It says representative on the door, and is to represent the 50 plus, the majority of the people in the district. And I would hope I get that opportunity again.
Great, thank you. Marla?
Well, I would say in closing, hopefully it's come across, but I'm passionate about the role of government. I believe in making government work. And I think that you make it work by electing people that want to undertake the right level of engagement on issues with people who maybe have not been brought into the room or the conversation before, and that we have a lot of serious issues we need to address that require real conversations into the public. And I believe I can do that. I have done it as a mayor. I think that the experience on the ground of trying to implement some of these policies and see where there are breakdowns would be an asset to this district. This district is geographically diverse. It's going all the way out and grabbing Goldendale and Klickitat County. So the needs across these communities, we also have a national scenic area, a lot of dynamics that span the length of this district that touch on issues we talked about today, especially housing and infrastructure, but certainly education. I think we talked about it in some of the answers, but there is work to be done to make sure that all kids in this state have the right and fair chance at success. Another thing that didn't come up at all, which I was kind of surprised, was just access to healthcare, and especially women's healthcare. Reproductive rights, I think that's another issue where you have different perspectives in the room and you come out with different conclusions. But I don't think we should be taking it as a given just to say, well, the right to reproductive care is protected here. That's maintaining, in my mind. There are parts of this district that lack access to proper clinics and care for women during pregnancies so that they're realizing safe deliveries and pregnancies, but also the right access to choices they may choose to make. So continuing to make sure that we become a state, as we see nationwide, the dynamic for all women, that their level of healthcare and medical support is now dependent upon where they live. That will be a pressure point for our state as we continue to allow access. So how are we thinking about that? How are we continuing to support it? And what does that look like? And that is a voice that I will continue to lead on. In terms of endorsements, I would say very strongly that a lot of what encouraged me to run was the support that I have in my community. And, yes, there are endorsements that I could rattle off to you, the Washington State Labor Council, Planned Parenthood Alliance, the Gun Alliance for Gun Responsibility. But at the end of the day, it's my police chief's endorsement. It's the senators at the federal level that I've worked with, both Cantwell and Murray, to help fund things like the bridge. The endorsements that are coming from those direct relationships I have that mean the most to me. And in service, I would hope that I build that list of endorsements through my work as a senator with everyone in this community, because I think that a lot of times what's lost is the day in and day out work, the lunch pail part of government, which is you show up, even when you're not in session, you go talk to the people that completely disagree with you so that you end up with some informed policy. And when you're having to make a tough decision, you can own it and you can stand up and still engage and continue to work together.
Great, well, thank you. Thanks to both of you then, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.